Welcome back to the John Frederick Show. This is your host, John Fredericks. Common sense for the Commonwealth. You're on Virginia's only statewide radio network where we are rocketing our way through Virginia because we are the proverbial adults in the room. Joining us, U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. He's a Democrat.
You know, you're allowed to talk to Democrats, John.
Talk to them all the time. Hey, Senator, we're fired up today. You know why?
I do not.
You are going where no U.S. Senator has gone in over 1,000 days. You're going to pass a budget. We're so excited.
I'm fired up, too. In fact, we have two steps before us, John, this week and next that are both, I think, going to be potentially quite positive for Virginia. So, you know, the first thing is we're in fiscal year 2013 right now. So before we get to the budget, we're in a fiscal year where we don't have a budget and we don't have appropriations bills, and so we've been operating off this kind of gimmick, the continuing resolution, where we say, well, because we couldn't reach an agreement before October 1 of 12 when the fiscal year started, we're just going to limp forward working out of last year's playbook. And even if, ships have been finished, we're still going to have money in the line item for those ships, and we're not going to have money in for the ships that have to be repaired now. So we've been limping forward on that, but the good news is the House passed a fix to that continuing resolution to avoid a shutdown on the 27th, but also to at least focus forward on defense, VA, and military construction spending, and do a forward-focused budget for the remainder of the fiscal year on those items. In the Senate this week, we will vote on that bill, and we're likely to add to it ag, commerce, law enforcement, justice, and do forward-focused budgets on those as well. So the first thing that we'll do this week, and it will be cooperative between the House and Senate, no government shutdown, brinksmanship, is we will pass a forward-focused budget for the remainder of this fiscal year that goes through October. But then today, the House Republicans are putting out their draft budget out in the House Budget Committee, and tomorrow we'll introduce the draft Senate budget in the Budget Committee on which I serve. We'll have some very significant debate in the committee over the next few days, and likely vote that out to the floor. And the hope would be that we would then, on the floor, take the budget up as early as next week and work our way through it, have debate, have amendments, but pass a budget for the first time since 2009.
Now, the elephant in the room is raising taxes. Again, I think Republicans have been clear, Senator, that they're not going to be open to that. And I think if you're a Republican today in their diminishing situation, voting for a second tax increase could be a disaster for them. And I agree with that. So how do you get this thing worked out if a majority of Republicans in the House simply say we're not raising taxes? Again, find the money somewhere else. What happens?
Well, John, first, the budget that we're going to put out is a budget that is the top goal is to promote economic growth and create jobs, and to also deal with our deficit situation. That's a second goal, and to bring deficit and debt down in a reasonable way. We're not going to. It's probably too early to get into what the other side's non-negotiables are, and I just don't think it helps, the process for sides to just lay non-negotiables on the table. So, for example, for Democrats, we're not saying we shouldn't cut spending. You're going to see spending cuts in our budget. You're going to see cuts in all areas, in traditional discretionary non-defense spending, in defense spending, in health care and entitlement spending. You're going to see cuts in all areas. But you will also see what we call a balanced approach. We feel like the only way to fix a balance sheet is to fix both sides of the balance sheet. And just to give you an example, here's a kind of revenues that many Republicans have expressed an openness to. They don't want to increase rates. Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
We don't need to. But we have a tax code that's like a Swiss cheese.
Right.
It's just riddled full of exceptions, credits, deductions, $1.3 trillion a year of tax expenditures, basically giveaways in the tax code. If you just were to reduce that amount of the tax expenditures by a modest single-digit percentage, you can come up with some revenue that will help you soften the blow of cuts to things like a defense industry, et cetera. So what you're going to see is a Senate budget that takes a balanced approach, that continues to make cuts in all areas because we need to, but that tries to find a path forward that will keep our economy strong while we reduce debt and deficit in the right way.
So it sounds like what you're going to try to do in the Senate is get something through that at least gives a platform for further negotiation with the House, right?
Yeah, John, and you got it exactly right. And this is going to be the challenging piece. Getting the budget through the Senate, through first the Budget Committee and then off the floor. I mean, nobody's taking anything for granted in this. We're going to have very vigorous debate, amendments, et cetera. But then there will be, assuming we get it through and assuming the House gets the Ryan budget through, there's going to be a challenging budget conference because these two budgets are going to look a lot different. But, John, this is what governors and state legislatures do in 50 states. The two houses often pass budgets that are wildly different. And then you get in a conference committee and you sit there for a while and fulminate and glare and pound your shoe on the table, and then you find, well, maybe on about 50% of the items we're actually pretty close. Okay, let's resolve those, and then you start to work through the ones where you're different and find a resolution. And there, we've tried everything else other than the normal budget order, the continuing resolutions, the super committees, the sequesters. We've tried everything else. It's time to go back to the regular order. There's really no substitute for this kind of a budgeting process that ultimately involves a conference and then compromise.
Hey, it's always good to have dialogue. You have to start there. Hey, speaking of dialogue, we had a 13-hour dialogue from your colleague Rand Paul in Kentucky. What did you think of his 13-hour filibuster? You think that was worthwhile?
Yeah, I do. I let me say the good and then just the bad. But the good was a talking filibuster works. It creates excitement. It draws people's attention to a very important issue. And I think the only bad I would say is that there was no danger that the president was going to use a drone to strike an American citizen on American soil. And to kind of suggest that there was is kind of like saying that the president hadn't produced his birth certificate. I think it kind of feeds into an attitude about the president commander-in-chief that, frankly, is unhealthy. But the point that he was making is a very important one, and the president talked about it himself in the State of the Union. We have to create a policy and legal architecture surrounding use of drones that is transparent to Congress, at least the intelligence committees on the Congress, and the American public, so that there is an appropriate set of rules about this, so it's not just at the whim of the president. That's very important. When the president gave his State of the Union, he said, you're going to see much more from us, and we need to have a dialogue about it. And I viewed what Rand Paul did as being, frankly, in the spirit of what the president talked about in the State of the Union. And it also showed that talking filibusters are a good thing. I continue to believe that the silent paper filibusters in the Senate, we had one last week that was a silent filibuster that blocked a judge, a judicial nominee who's been up 3 times before the Senate, and it was done with the silent paper filibuster. There's no accountability for that. So when you have somebody stand on the floor and make the case, he got attention. He got attention to a legitimate issue. Right. He and I might draw the rules slightly differently, but everyone, most of us agree that issue is one that is a very serious and legitimate issue for discussion, and he brought good attention to it by what he did.
So it sounds like you wouldn't classify him as a wacko bird.
No, not at all. Again, the suggestion that this president would do this on American soil, I would put that over toward that category. But the notion that we've got to have the president needs to be accountable to Congress on the rules for drone use, it makes a lot of sense.
Senator, we know you have a time constraint this morning so that your constituents can find out more about what you're working on up on the Hill. Give us how they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm looking at a staffer. They can follow me on Twitter at Tim Kaine. Yeah, at Tim Kaine. You can always follow me there, and it's because I'm on the budget.
Had a drop there. He did have a time commitment, so we will stick with that, John. And back in a short 90 seconds here on the John Frederick Show. I think he just forgot to put another quarter in the congressional payphone.